Do you know what events triggered the American Revolution? In the mid-18th century, the world witnessed a seismic shift in power as the 13 colonies in America began to question their allegiance to the Kingdom of Great Britain. The seeds of this discontent were sown in the aftermath of the French and Indian War. While the colonies had fought side by side with the British, they were left with a bitter taste as Parliament imposed new taxes to compensate for wartime costs. These taxes, coupled with the control of the colony's western lands being handed over to British officials in Montreal, fueled a sense of resentment and injustice among the colonists. The colonists were not just disgruntled subjects, they were individuals who believed in their rights as Englishmen. They felt that taxation without representation was a violation of these rights. And so, representatives from several colonies convened the Stamp Act Congress to articulate a response. They drafted a Declaration of Rights and Grievances, a powerful document that encapsulated their discontent and made a case for their rights. In a world where monarchs were often absolute rulers, this was a bold move. The colonists were challenging not just the policies, but the very authority of the British Parliament. They were asserting their rights, and in doing so, they were setting the stage for a struggle that would shape the course of history. The Stamp Act Congress was not a declaration of war. It was a plea for justice, a call for the recognition of their rights, but it was also a warning that the colonists were not mere subjects who would bow down to unjust laws. They were individuals who believed in their rights, and they were willing to fight for them. The seeds of revolution were planted, and it was only a matter of time before they would grow into a full-fledged rebellion. This was the spark of the American Revolution, a spark that would ignite a fire of change and lead to the birth of a new nation. How did a series of taxes fuel the flames of revolution? This is the question we find ourselves faced with as we delve deeper into the roots of the American Revolution. In 1767, the British Parliament passed the Townshend Acts, a series of taxes and regulations designed to exert control over the 13 colonies. These acts, however, had the opposite effect. They fanned the flames of rebellion, causing tensions between the colonists and their British overseers to rise to a boiling point. King George III, sensing the growing unrest, deployed troops to Boston in a bid to quell the rebellion. But this act of force only served to inflame the situation further. A local altercation escalated into the infamous Boston Massacre on March 5, 1770, where British troops killed protesters in the streets. This incident sent shockwaves through the colonies, turning simmering resentment into outright outrage. But the colonists weren't content with just expressing their anger. They were ready to fight back. In 1772, anti-tax demonstrators in Rhode Island took matters into their own hands, destroying the Royal Navy customs schooner Gaspé. This was a bold and audacious act of defiance, a clear message to the British that the colonists would not back down. Then, on December 16, 1773, the colonists took their protest a step further with the Boston Tea Party. Disguised as Indians, activists dumped 340 chests of tea, owned by the British East India Company and worth £9,659 into Boston Harbor. It was a symbolic act of resistance that resonated across the colonies. London's response was swift and severe. They closed Boston Harbor and enacted a series of punitive laws, effectively ending self-government in Massachusetts. But far from crushing the spirit of the colonists, these actions only served to strengthen their resolve. With each act of defiance, the colonists were inching closer to revolution. The stage was set for a showdown, a clash of wills that would change the course of history. The colonists weren't just fighting for their rights anymore. They were fighting for their freedom. What actions did the colonists take to coordinate their resistance? A question that takes us back to the throes of the American Revolution. London's response to the Boston Tea Party was swift and decisive. They closed Boston Harbor, effectively stifling the lifeblood of the city's economy. This was not all. A series of punitive laws were enacted, which the colonists derisively referred to as the Intolerable Acts. These laws stripped Massachusetts of its self-governance, placing it directly under British control. But the colonists were not ones to be silenced. They responded with a bold move of their own. In late 1774, delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies convened the First Continental Congress at Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia. Georgia, feeling the heat, would join them the following year. This Congress was more than just a meeting of minds. It was a unified front against British oppression. It served as a central hub for coordinating the Patriot resistance. The delegates were a diverse group, but they were united by a common cause: to resist British rule. They were not yet calling for outright independence, but they were demanding their rights as Englishmen. The Congress organized local militias throughout the colonies. These militias were not just ragtag groups of rebels, they were experienced fighters, many of whom had gained military experience during the French and Indian War. They were prepared to assert their rights to self-governance and defense. The First Continental Congress was a pivotal moment in the American Revolution. It marked a shift from isolated pockets of resistance to a coordinated, continent-wide effort. The colonists were no longer simply voicing their discontent. They were actively preparing for what was to come. They were mobilizing, strategizing, and most importantly, they were uniting. The colonists were no longer just defying British rule. They were actively preparing for a fight. And as we'll see in our next chapter, that fight was just around the corner. How did a group of colonies become a united nation ready to fight for its independence? There's no simple answer, but we can certainly trace the key events that led to this monumental shift. King George III, the monarch reigning over Britain during this period, declared the Massachusetts Bay Colony to be in a state of open defiance and rebellion in 1775. But this did not quench the flame of resistance. Instead, it ignited a roaring fire. The colonists responded by consolidating their forces. The Second Continental Congress, a body of representatives from each colony, convened at present-day Independence Hall in Philadelphia. There, they made a historic decision to authorize the formation of the Continental Army. This was not just any army, it was an army of colonial separatists, an army of farmers and tradesmen, an army of ordinary men brought together by an extraordinary cause. And at its helm was a figure who would become synonymous with American independence, George Washington. Appointed as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, Washington was tasked with leading this ragtag group of soldiers against one of the world's most formidable military powers. The first major conflict of this nascent revolution occurred at the battles of Lexington and Concord. Here, the British, attempting to seize militia weapons, were met with fierce resistance. This marked the beginning of a long, hard-fought war, a war that would test the mettle of these newly minted soldiers. In an incredible turn of events, the Continental Army managed to expel the British from Boston. This was a significant victory, a beacon of hope in what seemed like an insurmountable struggle. With this triumph, the Patriots gained control of each colony. The 13 colonies were no longer just colonies. They were united under one banner, ready to fight for their freedom. The colonists had taken up arms, and the war for independence had officially begun. The birth of a new nation was not a smooth process. It was born out of conflict and strife. But it was through this struggle that the United States of America was forged, a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who dared to dream of a free and independent nation. How did a document come to symbolize the birth of a new nation and the ideals it stood for? This question brings us to the pivotal moment in the American Revolution, the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. In July of 1776, the Second Continental Congress assumed the mantle of governing a nascent nation. These were men who had once been loyal subjects of King George III, but the escalating tensions and oppressive rule had transformed them into leaders of a rebellion. They denounced King George III as a tyrant a ruler who had trampled upon the rights of the colonists, rights they held as Englishmen. As a symbol of their defiance and their resolve to break away from the British rule, the Congress passed the Lee Resolution for National Independence on July 2nd. This was a bold move, a clear statement that they would no longer bow to the British crown. But they didn't stop there. On July 4th, 1776, a date etched forever in the annals of history, the Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. This was no ordinary document. It was a statement of principles, a testament to the ideals of a new nation. It embodied the political philosophies of liberalism and republicanism, rejected monarchy and aristocracy, and proclaimed a radical idea that all men are created equal. The Declaration of Independence was more than just a piece of paper. It was a beacon of hope, a promise of a new beginning. It was a declaration of the colonists' right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It was a denunciation of tyranny, an affirmation of self-governance, and a commitment to the principles of democracy. The American Revolution was not just a war. It was the birth of a nation built on the principles of liberty, self-governance, and the belief that all men are created equal. And the Declaration of Independence? It was and remains the symbol of those timeless ideals.